Hello everyone, Tin Manly here. Today I'm going to share with you 5 things about polar bear photography and a trip that almost didn't happen. By the end of the video, you'll know some of the best places on Earth where you can see polar bears in the wild, what camera gear is needed, and I will share a story with you on an encounter that I will never forget. With that said, let's begin. Number 1. Where to find polar bears? Polar bear is the largest land carnivore. There are 6 places I know of that you can see them. That includes taking a cruise in Svalbard in Norway, Barter Island near Prudhoe Bay and Barrow in Alaska, Wapusk National Park in the Canadian Arctic, Seal River Lodge north of Churchill. You can also ride in those tundra buggy in Churchill. And most recently, I heard that one can go to Baffin Island, but it can be challenging due to the uncertainty of when the sea ice would melt and that you would need to be on a snowmobile to go. Number 2, camera gear. Well, you definitely don't want to get too close to polar bears, so you will need your longest lenses. A 600mm with a 1.4x or a 2x teleconverter would be good. It's usually really cold. Wind chills could reach minus 50 Fahrenheit. One year, I heard that a visitor in Wapusk National Park didn't wear a pair of gloves while taking pictures of polar bear for a minute too long, and he had to be airlifted to a hospital to have the thumb amputated. So you gotta be really careful in this extreme weather. Number 3, my first encounter. The first time I saw a polar bear, it was in 2012. I didn't take a photo of that moment. Why? I was in a small boat in the Alaskan Arctic and I thought it's gonna take a while to find a polar bear. Well, within the first few minutes, I heard a splash about 500 feet away. I turned my head towards the sound and saw a big splash of water next to a small island. Then I saw them. 3 bears, a mother bear and 2 cubs, had just jumped into the water. The mother was turning back to make sure that the cubs were safe. I could only see their heads above the water, then they disappeared quickly. It happened so fast that I wasn't even prepared. All these years, I dreamed of seeing a polar bear and they suddenly showed up. I was wondering, was that real? I was in shock and I didn't take a photo. Number 4, Michio Hoshino. One year, I visited the Museum of the North in Fairbanks, Alaska. I came across the photos and writings of the late Michio Hoshino and I was deeply moved. I wanted to learn more about this legend by buying all his books, including Hoshino's Alaska and a book about him called The Blue Bear. In one of the chapters, Hoshino said he saw some wolf tracks on the snow one day in Alaska. He walked. I often think that one of the most important things in our life is the rich living things surrounding us human beings. Their existence not only heals us, but most importantly, they let us learn and understand what we human beings really are. I believe that only very few people would ever see a wild wolf in their whole life, but whether we would meet a wild wolf or not is not important. It's the fact that the wolves and us both live on and share this earth and that we understand and be grateful for this fact. That's the most precious thing for us. Not only wolves, but the meaning of all lives in our eyes should be the same. I love it. Being in nature allows me to appreciate the small things in life and forget about the expectations of our society. It let me know my limits in the power of nature, from learning the behavior of these wild animals and how they survive in the disappearing wilderness. I learned to respect them and also learned that life is fleeting and unpredictable. And I learned to treasure and be grateful for every moment. Number 5, an encounter I will never forget. I came back to the Alaskan Arctic again 1 year later in mid-October 2013. Little did I know that between 2 Alaska trips, my most beloved grandmother would pass away, just days after I went through a tough breakup. I was in mourning and I almost canceled the trip. But since I had booked and paid for the trip a year in advance, I went anyways, kind of as an escape. I've known my tour leader, Hugh Rose, for a few years and I highly respected him, but in that trip, Patrick Andrus, another photographer, would also co-lead the trip, and I have admired Patrick's photos for many years. After 2 days of driving and flying, it was already late in the evening when our plane finally arrived in the small airport in a remote village. We had originally booked 2 small boats for the 8 photographers, but only one boat showed up at the end. The captain of another boat had an emergency and had left the town. Our tour leader said whoever went onto the boat that evening would have to let the other 4 photographers be on the boat the next day. Decision time. Should I go now or wait for tomorrow? If I go now, I only have 1 hour before sunset, and the captain said he hadn't seen any bears so far, so it could be no photography. Or if I go tomorrow, and I would have at least 3 hours of photography, and likely there would be more bear sightings. While we were wondering who should go into the boat first, a couple said, "You guys should go. We have been here several times before." So this couple and our 2 leaders decided to let us go first. I have since been very grateful to the couple, David and Kathy. The sun was going to set very soon, and so far there have been no sightings of the polar bears that day. So we rushed onto the boat. The boat took off right after I got in. About half an hour later, we came to an area where the sea was filled with pieces of ice. We could hear the sound of the contact when the boat hit the ice. I could smell a mix of engine oil and metal in the boat. That smell always carried my memory back to trips to my native village when I visited Grandma. The ice-cold water from the sea got into the boat from time to time, and the floor was wet. Though my 600mm lens and the rented 200 to 400 weighed more than 30 pounds, I was holding them both by hand as I didn't want to leave them on the floor. My face and fingers were already numbed by the fresh yet cold Arctic wind. Pain was temporary. It made me feel alive. We scanned the area near and far. Nothing at all. The evening sun in the Arctic Circle was very soft. Like a soft focus filter, everywhere appeared to be covered with a thin orange blanket. Only 10 minutes before sunset, it seemed that we would be going back empty-handed. Expectation mostly only brought disappointment. But it's not bad at all, spending a lovely evening in a small boat in the Alaskan Arctic. Jack, our boat captain, who's a native of the town, saw that the light was fading and there wasn't much to see, so he turned the boat around, ready to return home. At that moment, I saw a little mound in the distance, kind of looked like a mochi, this Japanese dessert which I love. So I asked Jack, "What's that?" Jack picked up his binocular. "That may be a polar bear." Jack had already motored the boat in that direction as he spoke. As the boat arrived close to within 200 feet, we were able to see clearly. It was indeed a polar bear. Wait, no, it was actually a mother polar bear and her cub. Since we didn't want to disturb them, Jack immediately shut off the engine of the boat, letting it drift with the current. After 10 minutes, the sky suddenly turned golden. At that moment, they woke up and raised their heads slightly, looking at us curiously. I said to Jack, "Could you please move the boat a little bit to the left? The background may be better that way." So Jack nodded and moved the boat slowly towards the left. I kept my lens focused on the polar bear family. What we didn't realize was that another polar bear cub had been sleeping behind the mother bear this whole time. He popped his head up behind his mother, thinking we couldn't see him. After a while, they all fell back asleep. A few minutes later, the sun disappeared from the horizon. The afterglow of the sun turned the field of freshly frozen sea ice behind this polar bear family a salmon color, extending for miles and miles. The sleeping cub in front suddenly opened his eyes and looked at us. Then he stretched and flipped around and sat up with his back leaning against the mother bear. The bottom of his feet were facing us and they looked like snow boots. The current was rocking up and down. At times it would push us further and further away from the polar bear family, then suddenly it would pull us to a distance too close for comfort. If that happened, Jack would turn on the engine and slightly move the boat a little bit further away. I was standing in the boat and my feet was trying to grab hold of the boat so that I didn't fall off into the water. At that time, I had been hand-holding the 600mm lens and my camera and a 200 to 400 lens on my shoulder and the 70 to 200 and the 24 to 70 on my vest. The total weight was over 50 pounds. My arms and my legs were shaking vigorously. It's like being pushed by my personal trainer at the blink of muscle failure on bicep curls and squatting at the same time. I remember I had tears in my eyes and I just wanted to give up and put down the camera. But instead, I kept pushing, and at the end I rested my elbow on my waist and kept holding the lens. I knew something great was gonna happen and I didn't want to live in regret. Lo and behold, the polar bear cub suddenly opened his mouth and breathed in deeply as if feeling content. I clicked on the shutter. I was so moved watching how elegant and relaxed the motion of the cub was, as if he had completely accepted the presence of these few visitors from another world. The cub sat for a while. At one point, both his sibling and his mother woke up briefly and then they went back to sleep. I finally put down my camera. I turned my head and looked at my good friend Carl next to me. I didn't speak a word. My eyes were asking, "Did you just see that?" He nodded and I could see tears in his eyes too. We were surrounded by complete silence. I turned around and tried to look at the end of the horizon. That's when I realized that the moon was rising. A quote by Michio Hoshino suddenly popped up in my head. How strange human emotions. We are pushed left and right by the petty details of our everyday lives. I turned back and looked at the sleeping polar bear family. The salmon color of the sky had already disappeared and changed to pink. Seeing the simple lines created by the cub leaning on the mother bear, it was so peaceful. Though I barely had any strength left in my arms, I pulled together whatever I had left, put a teleconverter on the 600 and aimed my camera and took a close-up photo of them. I then put the camera down and took off my glove. I bent down and touched the piece of sea ice floating next to our boat. Feeling the cold and irregular structure on the surface, the painful sensation running through my fingers brought me closer to their world. I had heard that polar bears would be extinct in a few decades. Later, our tour leader Hugh and Patrick said they had not seen such light and encounter in this area for many years. Little did I know that this photo would be exhibited and was printed on the wall at an exhibit at HKUST in Hong Kong a few years later. And this won an award in Nature's Best Photography and was displayed in the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History for 9 months. I received an email from a lady one day, told me that her husband had cancer. They left their hometown and moved to a city closer to the cancer center. Her husband had treatments for a few years, chemo and radiotherapy. A few years later, the doctors told them the good news. Her husband was cleared of cancer. That evening, she leaned on her husband's shoulder and slept like a baby. The cancer treatment caused her husband to lose a lot of weight. He used to be a big guy, over 6 feet tall, and she used to call him her polar bear. She said that it brought her to tears when she saw this photo, and she wanted to purchase a print to surprise her husband for her upcoming birthday. And now this print is on their living room. And that's the story I wanted to share with you. If you enjoyed this video, smash the like button and click subscribe. Also, please click the bell next to it to receive notification of new videos in the future. And definitely leave your comments below and I will try my best to reply. If you want to learn photography, especially bird and wildlife photography techniques, I also have a 1-hour free training. So click the link below and thank you so much and I'll see you next time.